Do you believe in science or trust the science? Well, if you don't, you should be really worried because the priests of this false religion are ready to punish you for your blasphemy. Science has become a false religion. It's lost all semblance of what it was meant to be. It's now propped up as an all-knowing process performed by noble researchers that can do no wrong. And questioning it in any kind of way has become a crime. In this video, I'm going to talk about the limitations of science, why blindly following science is actually unscientific, and how the masses have been programmed to turn science into their religion. The first problem is that most people just don't understand what science is actually meant to be. Science nowadays has turned into some kind of cult that you're supposed to blindly believe and where questioning it is seen as blasphemy or like a crime. But that's not actually how science was meant to be. That in itself is anti-scientific. Science is the practice of asking a question and gathering high quality evidence and using logic to try and understand the answer to that question. So science is quite literally the act of questioning things. So saying things like, oh, I trust the science is like saying, I trust in questioning things. It doesn't really make sense. You're not supposed to just blindly believe what the experts tell you at face value. You're supposed to demand high quality evidence and use your own logic to parse through and understand what is true and what is false. That is true science. The second reason that science has become a false religion these days is because it's treated as something that's infallible, something that can make no mistakes and not do anything wrong. Many say they believe in science as if it's some kind of infallible god, as if science is all-knowing and can always guide the masses to the right direction without fail. But this is simply just not the case. Science is flawed and gets many things wrong. And don't just take it from me, take it from the academics who actually write about it. Earlier this year, I read this book called Science Fictions, written by an academic who himself showed how science is not infallible. He showed how the scientific process we know and practice today has many issues which obscure the truth. The truth is that science is limited. It can really only inform us on so much. What a lot of people don't realize is that even if researchers try to produce high quality evidence, which a lot of the times they don't, it is still very hard to do. It's hard to gather high quality evidence where you've taken into account all of the potential confounding variables. I see this a lot in the diet and nutrition studies I look at, where it's just really impossible to actually parse out the truth because there are just too many confounding variables in this data set. To perform truly high quality science where you can really get proper data to make sort of conclusions off of, a cause and effect kind of conclusions especially, you need to basically control your test subjects perfectly. It needs to be like a double-blind experiment, and you need to have your people in some kind of institution where you're overseeing them 24/7 and making sure that everybody is doing pretty much the exact same things other than what you're studying. Because if you're not able to do that, you don't really have the best data. And again, that is one of the biggest limitations of science overall. While I was editing the video, I realized that I probably could have added a little bit more detail and nuance. The overarching point I was really trying to get at there is that as humans, when we're doing science, we can really only analyze what we can observe. And as humans, we are limited. We cannot simply just observe everything. And even the things we can observe, again, we need to observe them properly and make sure there's no confounding variables. At the end of the day, if we have junk going into our science, then we're going to get junk coming out. And oftentimes, if you really look into a lot of science, it is mostly junk. It's just conjecture. The next point I want to make to refute this false religion of science is simply that academia these days is broken, and science is inherently biased. At the end of the day, science is performed by humans, and humans are flawed. So just like biases carry through in any other kind of profession, they certainly carry through in science as well. The book I mentioned earlier goes into great detail about the fact that science and the supposed quest for truth is often obscured by hype, bias, or even downright fraud. Going into specific examples of fraud is beyond the scope of this video, but it really isn't hard to find articles and stuff about academic and scientific fraud in the industry. Science requires funding, and funding generally comes from large entities who have vested interests. Thus, the researchers themselves are also incentivized to produce findings which will acquire them said funding, even if it comes at the expense of the truth. If one day, every single researcher decided to become honest and really only fight for the pursuit of truth and not let bias or anything get in the way, a lot of their funding would actually probably get taken away because a lot of the funders wouldn't have any reason to pay for this kind of science anymore. Again, because the funders are really not looking for science. They're looking for propaganda which can fund their point of view or their product or whatever else. But you might say that peer review can fix this, right? But in reality, the system of peer review is equally as broken, if not maybe even more. And again, the book goes into that. I know that if I try to freeball this part, I'm just going to mess it up, and I have it written very well in my script, so I'm just going to read it here. In a field where funding and publications dictate its future and reputation, groupthink towards the acceptable narrative is promoted, and those who go against the acceptable narrative, even if they have sound evidence backing them up, will be hindered by peer reviewers, who need to protect the established point of view. Again, the science fiction's book goes into a lot more detail about the flaws with peer review and a lot of this other scientific stuff that I'm talking about. But moving beyond peer review, a lot of these institutions are rotten from the top downwards. It's not hard to find books and articles from researchers who talk about how they faced a lot of pressure when they started showing findings that were kind of going against the established narrative or established point of view in their field of study. They got a lot of pressure from the very top of their institution, telling them basically to fall in line or get lost. And again, if you really think about the incentives, it just makes sense. Remember that these institutions make their money from funding. And if a researcher is going to be producing findings which are going against what a lot of the vested interests in their field want to see, it's bad for business. And at the end of the day, academia is a business just like pretty much any other thing in this life. I say all of this just to show to you that science and academia are not as noble as they're made out to be. You're told to essentially worship science, but the truth is that science will often stab you in the back when it's convenient for it. Before I wrap up this video, I want to quickly revisit the science fiction's book that I've been talking about at length in this video. For the first 240 pages of the book, the author showed me how flawed science can be. He showed me how scientists make tons of mistakes, ignore inconvenient evidence, use low-quality data, or even downright commit fraud. Yet, the conclusion at the end of the book was, more or less, to trust the science. The conclusion of the book essentially told the reader to not use his book as an excuse to question a lot of the narratives we see today that have essentially become no-go zones. Essentially, the author told the reader that yes, while I just showed you how science can be incredibly flawed and fraudulent, don't you dare use this book as an excuse to question the mainstream narratives. You need to shut up, cover your eyes, and blindly believe what the scientists tell you. And I found that conclusion to be incredibly ironic. It makes me think that the author still hasn't broken out of the shackles of science as a false god. When it's not really important, he can see some issues in science, but as it pertains to the mainstream point of views and industry-backed narratives, he cannot go against those in any way. He must blindly believe them no matter how much evidence to the contrary is presented, because if he doesn't, his religion and his entire worldview will be decimated. Or maybe, if I'm to give him the benefit of the doubt, this isn't what he truly believes, but only what he had to say in order to get this book published and ensure that he doesn't have a bounty placed upon his head. Either way, it provides even more evidence for my assertion that science has become a false religion. So, am I anti-science? No, I'm not anti-science at all. In fact, I'm actually for real true science. Again, I just have it written so well here, I'm just gonna read it off. I'm for the science where you don't blindly believe what you've been told. The science where you question things. Science where you demand high quality evidence. Science where you analyze the evidence and use reason to come to conclusions. Science which doesn't call you names and threaten your existence if the evidence points against the established position. Science which is firmly rooted in the search for truth. That is the kind of science I can stand behind, and that is the kind of science I stand for. But if by science, you mean the cult where you are told to blindly believe assertions made with low quality or no evidence at all, the kind of science where you are told to stop using your own brain and eyes and just surrender to the experts, the kind of science which has establishment backing and where going against it is seen as heresy, then yes, I am proudly anti-science. If you found this video interesting or informative in any way and want to learn more about my unique perspectives, visit the link in my description and join my Skool community. You won't regret it.